So, what's your take on the housing crisis?
Well, I think that personally, I think the system we basically have to bring in new legislation because the thing is that I personally think that we should have it so that the price of housing is actually set to something relative. So it's actually like you have the most common income because don't use the average income because I've thought about it that the average income is something like 70,000 because it actually you got to consider the fact that there's actually a lot of billionaires in Australia, and then the most common income's better because it's like something more like 50,000. So it means the average person, the actual most common person, is actually going to be able to afford a home. So it's like something basic like it's set to 5 times the most common income, and then set it so you have to be a permanent Australian resident. So you don't have some millionaire flying in, buying a giant beach house and mansion, and then flying out. And it's limited to one house per person, so it would essentially completely destroy the concept of a landlord, at least when it comes to housing and stuff. And the thing as well is that I would make it so it only applies to just housing, like a traditional house like this, where it's actually like bedroom, bath, and garage, and a backyard, and it's everything. So you can still buy like condominiums, and you can still buy like apartments, and if they want to invest in like real estate, they can still buy like I don't know, a warehouse or something
So
like
your
that.
basic concept is that a house isn't an asset;
It's a right.
it's a right.
Because the thing is, if you don't have a house, like for example me, it's like because a house is your castle, it's your fortress, it's where you can put all your belongings, it's where you can use as a base of operations, it's where you can because. I mean, you look at a homeless person; they don't have anywhere to like wash up and shower and clean, and so you don't have basic hygiene. You don't have that basic level of just human dignity of having a house to be in every night. It's very, very important for someone to just have a house.
So, what do you think of the situation in Melbourne where they say there's 22,000 empty apartments and yet there's 17,000 homeless people?
Well, see, that's the exact solution. Is just it should be every single one of those people should have a house, and it should be a guaranteed thing. It's not because it's ridiculous how the price of housing now is $1 million, but what's that in relation to? Like, it's not. It's kind of like I feel like what we need is like a gold standards.
Yeah.
Whereas we used to have the gold standard where it was actually fiat currency was actually relative to gold, and the price of gold just sort of stayed at what it was. But with housing's just it can just go up and down, and a price can be $2 million for a 3-bedroom house or something.
And how do you think they justify a $2 million house and the 19% increase in prices in Queensland alone and 14% across the whole nation, and yet there's 25% unemployed, and how many million people? 4 million people without jobs.
Well, see, that's the thing is that the problem is we actually have because we live in a system where housing is used as an economic unit. All the elite and the millionaires and the stockbrokers, all they think of is a house. They don't see it as a house that a human being lives in and a person actually has their belongings and they can start a family and they can have a life in a house. They just view it as a thing that costs $1 million. They don't view it as any different as like a supercar or a spaceship or something. They just think of it as an expensive thing that they can trade around in the stock market. And that's the reason why in The Big Short they loved having the housing market. The Big Short.
It's got some big stars.
Movie from I don't know when it was made. I think it was 2014, but it's on Netflix. And it's called The Big Short. It's got like Brad Pitt. It's got Steve Carell, Ryan Gosling. It's got a whole ton of actors. But that basically explains the reason why. Because that's the thing is the housing market crashed and the entire global economy crashed in 2008. But the thing is that none of the legislation was changed.
So that wasn't the first crash, though, was it? Because we had a crash in 87. There was Black Tuesday. We had a crash in 97. We had a crash in 2001. I remember seeing in the Australian financial section, 28th of August 2001, they said, the crash is coming. And then, 10 days later, this thing happened in New York and everyone forgot about the economy. And then again in 2007, a big crash from which they've never recovered. And yet, why are the house prices so high? America under COVID had 40 million locked out, no jobs. Australia alone had 4 million locked out, no jobs. Britain had, apparently world consumption of oil dropped by 25%, and Britain, the central bank governor there said, this is the worst recession in 300 years, but the price of everything has stayed the same.
Yeah.
How is that possible?
I don't really know, but I think the thing is that it benefits the people on top, obviously. But that's what I'm saying, is that the price of housing, that's the crazy thing, is that they report, the price of housing, a house already costs $1 million in New South Wales, and the price of housing is going up by 19%. And it's like, who would that benefit? But it only benefits the rich people who use this as an economic
You've got
unit.
unemployment. People can't pay for the houses they've got. There's supposedly, in Queensland alone, there's, again, 17,000 women living in their cars. The government's talking about having to provide 17,000 apartments or, social, what do they call it? Social...
something.
Yeah, social housing. So they're really just, probably tower blocks or something for these women, because people can't afford to pay, their super's not paying them. They're living in a car. They can't afford rent. They can't afford to feed their kids. Something like 1,000 people a week are having their electricity cut off, especially pensioners.
Yeah.
So who is funding these $1 million houses? There's something strange going on.
I don't know. There's some weird X factor that's pumping up the price of housing for some reason. But yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, we've got the mining industry. Campbell Newman said we have mining, we've got tourism, we've got the building industry. I can't remember the fourth one, but tourism died in March, February 2020 when we closed the borders, and it's not going to come back. And it's now almost September. Yeah, we're coming up for the anniversary, September 2021. So it'll be 20 years. America's collapsing in Kabul and Afghanistan. Everybody's in trepidation and worried about this and that.
You see, I just had a thought that it's like, if you ever have a system where you look at something and the price of it is completely disconnected to reality, and you look at it and you go, why is it that way? That's a bubble. So I think we're still in a housing bubble, and we've been in a housing bubble ever since 2008. And I think it's the exact same thing with like Bitcoin, where everyone looks at Bitcoin and goes, why the hell is this thing worth, $80,000 a Bitcoin?
Exactly, why?
And it makes no sense. Well, the thing is that people eventually cotton on, and eventually the right people start asking the questions. The actual stock market brokers go, hang on a second, why is this thing worth so much? And they actually look at the books and they go, it's not. And then suddenly that causes a crash. And so I think we're set for another housing bubble crash. And whenever that happens, it'll probably cause another GFC or something.
So that's really a good thing, though, because it'll crash.
It's
the
a good thing for us,
and the real people can go back to buying houses instead of living in their cars.
But that's the thing, is that's why for the millionaires who, no offense to your sister, but for people who own like 9 houses, it's beneficial to them because they're making exponentially more money, but it's not beneficial to the 22,000 homeless people. So yeah. I think the system is definitely set for a reset.
So you've got to wonder who this economic system, we're told it's capitalist, it's democratic, whatever.
Well,
but who's it benefiting if the majority of people can't afford to live in a house? Apparently it's now 54% of people are saying they'll never own their own home.
Yeah.
They've given up.
No, I'm never going to own a home.
I work with people who have 50-year loans.
Yeah.
They're going to be paying it off into their 70s.
Yeah.
Now, that's crazy.
But see, that's the thing. That's the reason why the housing market crashed in 2008, was because what they started doing was they actually started thinking of mortgage-backed securities, which is basically what... See, it's very important, the legislation behind this, because the thing is that what they basically started doing was they wanted this assumption that they were like, oh, everyone pays off their loan, everyone pays off their house, right? And so they started actually using that as an ability to trade debt. And so that's why they would go, oh, here's 1 million homes, and no one's actually, all they've done is sign the contract basically. And there's no actual like real money there. But the housing market and the economy looks at that and goes, oh, that's actually $100 million worth of profit. And they actually use that as something. And so, but unfortunately, it's wrong, and there's actually not a lot of work there.
Because one thing you saw in The Big Short, and I always see this as a reply to The Wolf of Wall Street, which showed this euphoria, Leonardo DiCaprio and Jonah Hill. Oh yeah, we're rolling in the money. But Big Short sort of says, "Wait a minute, we've got morals too. Wall Street
Yeah.
traders aren't all crooks." And then they tried to warn the system, and it wouldn't listen, and it was
Well,
almost like it didn't understand
That's
itself.
the funny thing about The Big Short is they weren't actually trying to save the system. All they were basically trying to do was they realized, oh, the housing market's going to crash, so they just tried to bet as much money as they could against it. And so it's funny, they kind of weren't actually trying to signal other people and say, hey, the housing market's going to crash. All they saw was how to profit from the rest of the world crashing and dying. But yeah, it's interesting.
Okay.